Hello and thank you for joining me for another ITY video. I'm joined today by Durand. He's the CEO of Ping Identity. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Alex.
So you're here today, we're at a lunch briefing, but before we get on to that, could you please just give us a quick refresher of why you decided to start Ping and sort of a little bit on your journey and the breadth and depth of the services that you offer today?
So I started Ping from an aha moment back in 2002 when it occurred to me that we weren't known on the internet. It's the classic dog cartoon that I discovered much later. And it was a realization that what could be more important than your digital identity when we live in an increasingly digital world and a digital economy. And I felt like the first question was always going to be, who are you and can you prove it? And so it was from that kind of singular question that I asked myself that I said, it would seem to me that this is a big, hairy problem that needs to get solved, and I wanted to be a part of solving it.
And of course, we were part of the legacy of the internet and the technology being created from a very open perspective with no thought for security at the very beginning.
Yeah, there was an interesting Vint Cerf interview. This is several years ago now. The question was asked if you could go back and do anything over, learning what we've learned and seeing what we've seen over the course of the last 35 years, what would that be? And Vint's comment was that I would have tackled identity. I mean, we knew it was potentially an issue back when we created the internet, but we presumed that it was a fairly trusting network amongst trusted educational institutions and technologists, and quite frankly, we never envisioned it was going to become what it has become. And so 35 years later, here we are, and we're still grappling with answering the question of who are you on the internet. And today we've got to now retrofit 35 years worth of work. The default was anonymity by default, and locking the computer terminal in a room was a proxy for security. And that's obviously changed drastically.
Dramatically. So what are your top products and services today? I mean, I'm sure most people watching know, but just the short version.
Yeah. So it turns out that a modern identity infrastructure that is based upon open standards is really the precursor, I think, to the breakout in identity. We've had identity since the beginning of compute, but it's been largely, as I say, kind of proprietary and siloed. And we're in an age now where identity is networking so that we can achieve these end-to-end security solutions of authenticating a user irrespective of what network or device they're on, and allowing them to go wherever they need to go on our networks or over the broader internet into our partner networks. And so it turns out that we've had to develop the open standards that can convey these identity use cases and then instantiate those into software and SaaS offerings to allow these enterprises to basically reimagine themselves and reimagine the entire construct of the perimeter around identity. And so we offer a number of kind of core services and capabilities to enterprises to authenticate users using mobile phones. We've got a very modern MFA solution, multi-factor authentication, that is based upon a growing amount of intelligence on our mobile phones. And then we have really the gold standard for single sign-on, standards-based single sign-on that enterprises deploy for their employees to gain access to cloud applications, or for customers to then have a single login experience at, say, a customer portal. And then we also provide access control solutions so that once you've authenticated a user and you allow them to go anywhere, you've got to control, do they have access to this API? Do they have access to this web page? And the software that controls that is also technology that we provide enterprises. Maybe the last component of this is that all of our identities are stored in databases and user directories, and we just have a world-class user directory that we acquired last year. It's kind of consumer telco grade. I think hundreds of millions of users, high performance, high security, and together we sell these solutions into enterprises that are trying to both secure but enable single sign-on and seamless access for their employees, as well as I said, also their customers and partners.
And with the Internet of Things, IoT, the big buzzword, are you doing work to identify devices as well as users?
So that's on the horizon. We talk about How do you manage the identity of your employees? How do you manage the identity of your partners? How do you do it for your customers? IoT is this emerging identity type, if you will. It's going to have orders of magnitude more objects. And
billions.
Yep.
Trillions.
And so that is on the future roadmap for us.
So we had a great lunch briefing from you today where you spoke about the history of the company and about the things you're doing, but what else? Can you give us a bit of a wrap about the other aspects of security, authentication and biometrics and some of the points that were raised that really resonated with you today?
I think the big one that I see that I think will change the landscape of security and identity and authentication is this notion that our devices, these mobile phones are really the ultimate identity authentication device, if you will, or if you're in the industry, they're the ultimate identity token. And so there's just a growing number of capabilities in these mobile phones that will recognize and authenticate us. It's not going to be a one-time event. They will kind of recognize and authenticate us continuously.
Across multiple factors and
leveraging
rates.
Lots of different factors, right? And so it's not just the Touch ID or the thumbprint or the Face ID now. The way we hold the phone is actually a biometric. The way we type our passwords is also a biometric. And of course, what we do on the phone, there's a user behavior associated with that and risk that can be associated with known and recognized behavior and unknown behavior. Where the phone is located, whether or not the device has been trusted, whether or not the device itself has been compromised. These are all things that kind of go into the risk associated with, is Andre, and how sure are we and how recently have we verified that? And then from that, then we can take a much more trusted, much more secure notion of who you are, and we can propagate that notion throughout the internet.
And this is something that exists now, or you're working on it, it's coming soon, what's the time?
Yeah, I was going to say, so several things that I just mentioned are actually doable today and are being done today.
By you and the industry.
Absolutely. And it's a matter of how much intelligence do we associate with what we're doing.
I mean, we're talking about machine learning to that effect.
I mean, ultimately we want to take the concept of risk and we want to make that very fluid. And so risk is not a static thing. Circumstances change, behavior changes the risk associated with things, and what we're doing changes the associated risk. And so we need an identity system that is much more dynamic than they are today.
And you're working on that in the background for future releases?
Well, you're kind of talking about the big vision, right?
Yeah.
We're going to go from pretty static, kind of almost the what we'll call the manual side of identity management, and we're going to move into a much more dynamic world.
Sure. Now, you've made the trek to Australia from your headquarters in Denver, Colorado, but it must have been for more than just to meet with the local press. What are you doing in Australia? Presumably catching up with various customers?
We've had a presence here for the last several years, and we've got a number of very large banks, retail organizations, government institutions that leverage Ping. And I'd like to come down here once every about year and a half, and just make sure that we're servicing them well. I'm also observing that Australia is, in many fronts, the conversations are significantly elevated from that I'm seeing in the U.S. There's just there's a higher level of conversation associated with the role of government in identity, the need for better proofing that the private sector can then utilize. And just a lot kind of what I call ecosystem collaboration going on between government, between the carriers and the telcos that I'm talking to. So in many senses, it's good to come down here and understanding what's happening in Australia, because I think it's going to be a pattern for what other countries do in the future as well.
And now that you're down here, will you spend any time in Asia as well on the way back?
It's an Australia trip.
Okay, yeah. But obviously you have a global presence and must be traveling regularly to capture the zeitgeist of what's happening around the world and check it all out.
I do. So, I mean, Europe is a large market for us. It's kind of the second market for Ping, and I spend a fair amount of time in Europe. And of course, Europe is, it's a lot of different identity systems and different views of the role of government in identity, ranging from kind of the extreme side of privacy enabling all of, and regulating all of this identity infrastructure to constructs that are a little bit more liberal. But but yeah, I would say outside of the US, it's Europe and Australia.
Sure. One of the things you spoke about was this singular moment, which made me think of Ray Kurzweil's Singularity. If we look into the future, look in the crystal ball, I don't know if it's 10 years or longer, but how do you see the whole market evolving in line with the big vision you spoke of before?
I would say that identity is an embedded, it's almost an embedded feature of other revenue generating services. It's not a revenue generating service today. It's not a business model unto itself today. It really is an enabler of all of these other, of business agility, of security, without perimeters, but it's not a business model. And so I do think that we will approach a moment in time where the importance of identity will not play second seat to other revenue generating services. It will become a business model unto itself. And when it does that, that's kind of what I refer to as the singularity moment. We will have taken a quantum leap in the infrastructure that we're building, but how the services are delivered and how they're valued by consumers, and ultimately how they're paid for by consumers without being subsidized by other services.
And as we get towards the end of the interview, I always like to change gears a little and just ask if you could please share what has been some of the best advice you've ever received to help you get where you are today.
So I had a conversation with a mentor and gentleman I had actually never met. This is back in 1991, and we had kind of, as I would say, a phone business romance. I was trying to sell him something, and he was probably 15 years older than I was, and he made a comment to me at that time. I was running my software company, my first software company, on the weekends and at nights. And his comment was, Andre, in my experience, nothing happens until you commit.
Yeah.
And he said, maybe someday I'll quit my job and you can quit your day job and we'll get serious about your weekend hobby. And I always remember back to that bit of advice. Nothing really happens until you commit.
The universe then moves. Right? Yeah.
The world filters out the uncommitted and has an uncanny way of understanding where the line of commitment needs to be to discern those that are and are not committed. And so when I pursue things now, if it's worth doing, it's worth fully committing to.
And did you guys go into business together?
We did.
And are you still in business today?
We aren't, but
Well,
we're really good friends.
Okay, that's great.
Yep.
So what's your final message for ITY viewers and readers and for your current and future customers?
Look, I would say this: if you haven't explored the role of identity in your business, I think every company is going to experience its own version of a digital transformation. And you will likely quickly discover that somewhere underneath what your business is looking to accomplish lies a notion of identity and how you interact with your consumers, what experience you're providing them.
And the trust that you both have with
And the trust that the brand permission that you have with your customers. And inevitably, you will probably need an identity strategy. And so I would just encourage people, if they haven't looked at this, to begin to look at it, because there's literally nothing that I can think of on the internet that doesn't begin with who are you and prove it. And that is an identity question. And in a world of cloud where the perimeter has now shifted entirely based upon mobile phones and cloud usage, an identity strategy is not going to be an afterthought, it's going to be a forethought.
And if the viewers out there ping you, you'll ping them back.
That's right. Thank you.
Andre, thank you very much, and wish you the best of luck in Australia.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.